See, I'm just a student trying to do the right thing. Can you bother someone else? Especially you or old, so you don't really matter because we have to live in this world. So I'm again.
There's what is it? 1.9 million people still in prison.
You can buy a Russian
There's
bride
AIDS
now.
throughout the country, and
society,
people hate it. People
during
hate
the
it under
Soviet,
Putin.
you cannot buy a Russian bride.
Even Fox News talks about how horrible it is under Putin. So don't tell us about how bad Soviet Union went under the capitalist state of Vladimir Putin.
How bad was Yeltsin?
What's the Russian flag?
Mafia. Instead of people out for the working class, you got the fucking mafia running Russia right now. And don't say they don't, because you know it's the fucking truth.
Yeah, don't blame me. I'm an American citizen.
I don't give a fuck. You're trying to tell me? Fuck you.
Okay, I'm just trying to have a conversation. Just
want to have a
wondering.
conversation. You're trying to bait me. So get the fuck out of my face.
Okay.
Able to carry out throwing over 13.
On and on and on. Plus the fact that 28,000 children die every day in the third world for preventable disease because of fucking imperialism. So don't talk to me about Stalin did this or Stalin did that when you're sitting in the country that has killed more people in the history of humanity than any other country.
Well, but if I tell you that I...
So these are my thoughts for the Occupy cucks or the Occupussies. It's just degenerate. Nah, just kidding. But I won't just stop there. I mean, I still agree with the fact that they're degenerate, but I won't stop there. I will talk about the movement, particularly the Occupy Wall Street. Let's look at them. There's a lot of things I observed from the Occupussies. The first one is that these people are completely deluded, economically illiterate, let along the side of historically inaccurate. As the nature of reality, they are just deluded. The whole premise of their little socialist let's all be happy and get along, you could see it happening on collective farms, etc. But their idea that we will all be equal, we will all show up at this place, we will all be good people in this united front, it's deluded, and there's going to be some obvious problems with it. They are so economically illiterate and fail to recognize the purpose of private property. Or why do you need some sort of top-down regulation? They demand more democracy but have absolutely no organization within their own community. Versus the people you see with the Don't Tread on Me flags, the Tea Partiers, NPI, Amaran, etc. They actually have fairly civilized rallies. It's organized, they have decided what's allowed and what isn't. Everyone is well behaved, they rarely have any beef with the police. These left-wing Occupy movements are just a complete free-for-all, and it's like an anarchy, with no rules. Theft is rampant, there's all sorts of problems. They set their nice little collective with their buddies to try and protest against capitalism, but then you get some homeless people or some gangbangers who aren't even interested in politics showing up to cause trouble. Any of us with common sense can predict that any household, any community, any organization, any collective of individuals will need some sort of hierarchy, some definition of property rights, private ownership, such as which person has control over what. Human organization requires organization, of course. These occupussies, completely fail to acknowledge that. And of course we have the feminist delusion in the Occupy Wall Street protest against the evil systematic sexism, racism, and capitalism. And although they might not be that common, but they are very common in most movements. There are rape problems and instances where rapes have occurred in the Occupy movements because it's a free-for-all full of sexual liberty, drugs being passed around. It's just degenerate. But the more underlying core of the issue is that a sane view of human nature and realism, as I have talked about before, recognizes that men and women are different. And women are the coy, the choosers, and they tease while men are the pursuers. And if you get into a chaotic environment with lots of drugs and alcohol, with lack of standards, without male protecting the female, the things can actually get crazy, and it will be hard for the women as well. There's a reason as to why strip clubs have male bouncers and other forms of male security, because without men to protect the women, the sex will get out of control and there will be sexual assaults. But they have such feminist delusions of perfect equality and try to engage in this utopian egalitarianism by saying that men and women are the same, even though men and women aren't identical or equal in any way, shape, or form. It leads to this chaos, and that's why You see all these rapes in the Occupy movement. And then, of course, the entitlement complex. It usually comes from the left and all the socialists. They want free stuff, also known as the gives me that. They want free education, but they went to college and enrolled in a useless gender or race studies with no career to back them up. But now you want government-sponsored education? You should have found a field of study that will actually lead you to a career and lead you to a path of a future, and you could have figured out a better way to spend those 4 years in college. But demanding free education is ridiculous because, for one, you are not entitled to the fruits of labors of other people, and second, the system in the university will become more corrupt than it already is. It's no secret that there's a lot of Marxist indoctrination in the universities, and the system is just corrupt in many ways, where the professors and the banks make more loans and tons of money because, remember, student loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy court. But instead of looking at that, they look at the government and demand free education, like in Europe, because everybody is smart enough to go to universities, because we must need 16 years of our lives getting a bullshit education rather than just going 12 years of our lives. They just want free shit. But free stuff doesn't mean free, because where are they going to get the money from? Obviously from taxpayer funds. So free education is not what you think it is. It really isn't. Because university is a lot of fun where you get to screw off, avoid the real world, avoid responsibility, show up to class, only get a C, and go to parties and fuck girls all the time while your parents and the loans pay for everything. And you're complaining about free education. I have a complex view of economics. I think most people in the 1% are scumbags. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they could be an exception to some extent. Although some rich elites are scumbags, but at the same time, I'm not against wealthy or successful people. You're an idiot if you're against the wealthy to the point where you want to kill them and eat the rich. Even though these same rich scum are what gives us jobs. And if you're complaining about that, then move to another country. Why do you think the manufacturing sector is dying here in America? Because we do eat and soak the rich. And so they send jobs overseas, not because it's cheaper, but because it's easier. Because they are not being taxed to death. It's just as expensive to hire someone in China as it is to hire someone in the United States. But in China, I don't think you'll have to buy off a bunch of politicians and jump a bunch of hoops just to open up a company. All these people are so deluded that they have a hard time understanding the reality of the world. They have no conception of violence, and like every typical leftist, they have this double think where they will talk about how violent we on the alt-right are, but they are the most violent people ever. Disagreeing with them will get you jumped or even stabbed. They also have no conception of starvation or even the natural environment. Everything about their views and beliefs are idealistic. They want to live in a circle jerk, a happy wonderland where everyone has high university educations and everything is free, but at the same time we can screw off, but still manage to allocate scarce resources. It's all completely delusional, honestly. I know I said this already, but they are so economically illiterate, which is one delusion. These people will equate capitalism with corporatism, but here's their solution to stopping corporatism. Well, first you must understand what corporatism is. It's where the government and the corporations are in bed with each other, and the corporations will be rewarded by the state, so if they fail, they won't fail, they will end up receiving government subsidizes via taxpayer funds to stop businesses from failing, and due to these regulations, these big corporations lobbying for more government regulation because they can afford the cost, while small and medium-sized companies can't afford the cost, so they go out of business. But the logic of the leftists in the Occupy Wall Street movement is that they want the government to impose more regulations on these corporations, but they fail to recognize that by increasing it, it will increase state and corporate power, which is corporatism, but they fail to realize that. How are we sure that the free market won't cause a monopoly? Because everywhere we look in history, there has never been a monopoly under a free market. Delusions are a product of the society that we live in. And another thing is that they are shapeless. They don't have something that they are fighting for. If you argue with these Occupy cucks, all 20 of them will give you 20 different answers as to what they are fighting for. Some of them are protesting against government bailouts, which is something I strongly oppose. Some are arguing for free stuff. Some are just arguing for, I don't know, like, what could be one? I don't know, they're always arguing about something, but it's always something different. It's really something different. They are remarkably diverse in their cause. There's absolutely no coherent ideology in the movement, although they don't look similar to the 60s protests. In the 1960s, they actually had leaders and a cause. As much as I hate hippie leftists and despise these people, at least they had a cause, and at least they were able to organize and protest against one thing, and that is the Vietnam War, or the Million Man March. Delusions are a product of the society that we live in, and another thing is that they are shapeless. They don't have something that they are fighting for. If you argue with these Occupy cucks, all 20 of them will give you 20 different answers as to what they are fighting for. Some of them are protesting against government bailouts, which is something I strongly oppose. Some are arguing for free stuff. Some are just arguing for, I don't know, like, what could be one? I don't know, they're always arguing about something, but it's always something different. It's really something different. They are remarkably diverse in their cause. There's absolutely no coherent ideology in the movement, although they don't look similar to the 60s protests. In the 1960s, they actually had leaders and a cause. As much as I hate hippie leftists and despise these people, at least they had a cause, and at least they were able to organize and protest against one thing, and that is the Vietnam War, or the Million Man March. In these Occupy movements, there aren't any leaders. It's a total anarchy. There isn't an explicit cause or leader of the Occupy Wall Street. The movement is literally just arose spontaneously. And while the 60s hippies had a common culture, they just had different styles, different ideas, and for the most, at least the majority of our middle-class college students getting screwed over with their useless degrees. Some are unemployed people who get fired because of their drug problems and habits. Some of them are people who are just lazy and demand higher paid wages because they want more money for a job that requires no skill. But of course, you'll get the homeless and you'll get the gangbangers showing up with their sagging pants showing their crap-stained boxers, etc. There is no common culture or unifying thread. The only thing that unites them is that they are pissed off and hate the United States. As a product of their anger, they have no endgame. There's literally no endgame in the Occupy movement. And again, I hate these hippies, but at least they had an endgame. They wanted their trash like feminism, sexual liberty, and fight racism with more racism, and end the BS war in Vietnam. When the war in Vietnam ended, the whole movement began to fall apart. The Occupy Wall Street has no objectives. They just demand free tuition, or we want this self-contradictory nonsense. There's no objective, no goal, no leaders, no endgame, and no common culture. At least the hippies, and again, as much as I hate these people, at least they had a common culture. Protests happened out of nowhere. I remember around 2012 or 2013, on social media, Facebook was going on and about how there is a huge protest happening and nobody is reporting it on the news and calling it a false. They were even calling it a false flag, a media blackout, but it wasn't necessarily a blackout. Rather, I think the media had no clue on what was going on. To get the attention of the media, all you have to do is call the press and tell them what you're pissed off about, and then the press releases it and eventually promotes it all over the media. Most protests are also organized by very well-funded government organizations or government-funded organizations, just like the Slut Walk movement. They had big funding behind it, funded by government employees, university profs, and there were tons of taxpayer funds going into this, and there was also government employees behind the Slut Walk movements. Occupy had no movement until eventually Soros then came in. But when it started off as a small grassroots movement that wasn't really organized. It wasn't well organized at all, but it was a grassroots movement for a short time. These leftist occupiers are the perfect puppets for people like George Soros and the globalists, because they have the same goals. One of those goals are open borders. But what the occupussies don't realize is that as they are supposedly advocates of the working class, they don't realize that open borders will disenfranchise the working class, because as soon as these immigrants pour in, flood the country with cheap labor, and as the wages get lower, the working class cannot prosper, but the globalists will make tons of money, while at the same time destroy our national and cultural identity. This not only shows how ignorant they are, but it also shows that they are economically illiterate again. In my video where I talked about useless left-wing causes, movements, and supposed organizations that are useless because they really don't do anything other than defend the status quo, or they just really don't serve their cause. They really have nothing to complain about when the state, the entertainment industry, and the several grievance industries are pandering to their views. What is there for them to complain about? Nothing. Now all they are doing is whining and blaming others for their failures. That's the Occupy movement in a nutshell. That's why it tends to be so disorganized, because none of them have any cause or complaints. So it's very easy for these movements to just get co-opted by another group. Who knows? They are also full of envy. They do not hate the rich because of exploitation. Oftentimes it's jealousy and envy that leads to it. Because half of them are broke and get money from their parents, and because they have to work in order to make money, they end up hating their bosses. It's envy and laziness both going in hand. I'm not saying they go in hand all the time, but in the cases of these people, it is going hand in hand. Because they just want all their bosses' money, and they just want it for themselves. Like, all they do is want it for themselves, and then will call other people greedy for wanting to succeed on their own. But yeah, this is just a somewhat of a short rant. Hope you enjoyed this video, and blaze out.